Why don't we get started? I'm Dr. Baker, and I want to talk to you today about humor, error, and correction, the secret lives of manuscript marginalia. And Dr. Mojo's talk this morning, just now, as a keynote lecture, is a wonderful segue into what I hope to talk about today. In his choruses from the Rock, T.S. Eliot contemplates the nature of the modern world, of the industrial mind. The eagle soars in the summit of heaven. The hunter with his dogs pursues his circuit. O perpetual revolution of configured stars. O perpetual recurrence of determined seasons. O world of spring and autumn, birth and dying. The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment, brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness. Knowledge of speech, but not of silence. Knowledge of words and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to death, but nearness to death no nearer to God. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries bring us farther from God and nearer to the dust. As a professor of literature trained in medieval studies, these questions resonate with me in profound ways. I'm a person who cares a great deal about books in a world that doesn't have much time for them. As Eliot notes, we live in a world marked by the endless cycles of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment, knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words, and ignorance of the word. And all this action, this motion, this knowledge and information brings us no nearer to God and only nearer to the dust. Wah, wah. Oh, sorry, right? Sorry for bringing things down so low here, folks. I promise we're going to turn it around soon. Things will look better for us, I think, maybe. So our focus series theme is imagining the word, and today I'd like to work a bit on your imaginations and hopefully convince you that the margins of medieval and modern manuscripts are strange places where we might gather and find knowledge not of motion, but of stillness, not of speech, but of silence, and not of words alone, but of the word. But I'm not naive. I know that when we think of books today, they often evoke various emotions dependent upon the individual. A book's often the bane of freshmen, the killer of joys, the harbinger of sleep, the inducer of boredom, the muddler of minds. But despite their notoriety, and I'm not fibbing, I promise when I say this, sometimes we make up situations that don't actually happen as professors. Nearly every semester when I finish teaching World Lit, which is our Gen Ed Lit course, I inevitably have a student approach me who says, Dr. Baker, I've never liked books, I never read them, I only read insert like number less than 5 here when I was in high school. But I love these stories this semester. I wish I'd read more before this class. And I don't think these students are grade grubbers. I don't think. I think they're good people who for the first time in their lives have been able to make time for stillness and silence. With words. With some of the best books the Western world has to offer, they've come to know that books are a gateway to another world, a counselor at times, a mirror into their souls. I think we often fail to make time for books because they become strange to us. They are, after all, intrusive, demanding, and slow. They don't fit our pace. They're too neat. And if we're being honest, they have also become quite bland to look at as a material object. When's the last time you opened a book to find doodling between the lines or dragons in the margins? Have you found in your books as of late monkeys blowing horns out of their posterior? Any rabbits slaughtering helpless men? I imagine not. For most of us, the last time books were actually, or really saucy, were in grade school. You too may yet recall the halcyon days of our youth when we leafed through our school-assigned textbook to see what gems lay hidden inside. The history of the long line of previous owners, a signature, a doodle, a funny to only 12-year-olds comment, furtively penned when Mrs. Hannigan had her back to the class, Or maybe it was your junior high yearbook, the one in which Jimmy Current scrawled the oh-so-original "I signed your crack" in its spine. But those days of books with benefits are gone. These days we dare not make a mark on our books for fear the campus bookstore won't give us that 86 cents when we sell back our biology textbook we paid $200 for 3 months earlier. These days books, like Victorian children, are meant to be seen, not heard or written on, but you get the point. We owe some of this books as artifact mentality to modern print culture. With the advent of the printing press in the 15th century, the Western world began its quick-tempoed march toward textual standardization and mass production. To be clear, I am no technophobe. And if you know anything about textual technologies, maybe you were at Dr. Bilbrow's talk this morning, then you know that with each new technology, something is lost and something is gained. So what is the knowledge we have lost or gained as we move and have moved from a manuscript culture to a book culture? First, books were no longer the prerogative of the wealthy. The printing press became the great equalizer, as texts became affordable for a middle class. In fact, the history of the Bible and its movement into vernacular languages occurs alongside this technology. So I'm not saying that technology is inherently evil. There are many things to be praised about it. My concern today is with what knowledge we have lost in this technology. The word manuscript means handwritten, and so its name reveals its form. A thing that is handwritten requires careful planning, collaboration among artists and scribes, and a considerable amount of time to complete. Remember what it was like to write your report? Did you? No, you probably don't. Write reports by hand? You all type them out now, don't you? Even in, okay. Lost. Technology. That knowledge is lost. Manuscripts have histories because they have long lives. They were created by people, for people, to be read, to be loved, to be shared. They're snapshots into the past, the present, and future. They've changed lives, crowned kings, converted sinners, and inspired dreamers. And they bear the marks of their long history on their pages in a way modern books simply cannot replicate. It's a virtue of a modern book to be clean, neat, and identical in every copy. It is a virtue of a manuscript to be a living creature. Our modern sensibilities don't like messy texts that have been written on or doodled in. In fact, rather than existing as a sign of its living identity, marginal scribblings and doodlings, along with textual errors, become a sign of a book's imperfection, its inefficiency, its human error. And so we might say that books in many ways have lost their individual personalities. Think of it this way. For a book to make it to print today with even a handful of errors in it is a sign of a poorly constructed work. Too many of those books, and an inattentive editor is probably out of work. Even those errors that occasionally do find their way into print are easily removed by the second printing. And when we write essays for class today, a textual error is amended quickly and quietly, leaving no trail of its waywardness behind. I've said already that I'd like to work a bit on your imaginations by visiting the margins of medieval manuscripts, so I'd like to spend some time describing what they are. We know it's handwritten, but what is a manuscript? Again, we need to think of them as living documents. And when we do this, we can think of them as living documents that hold on their pages the signs of their long life, like the many branches of a tree. They were slow to completion, costly, and locally made. Contrast this with modern printed works, which are quick to completion, comparatively cheap, and often outsourced. So to get a sense of the sort of labor that went into creating a manuscript in the Middle Ages, I want us to take a look at this video that the J. Paul Getty Museum put together on manuscript creation. Let's see if I can get it to work. Technology.
The transition from a fresh skin to a surface suitable for writing was a slow and laborious process. The parchment maker selected skins of sheep, goats, or calves. Skins were soaked in lime water for 3 to 10 days to to loosen the animal's hair. The parchment maker then scraped away the hair and any remaining flesh. After this, the skin was soaked in fresh water to remove the lime and then stretched tightly on a plane. A special rounded knife was used to scrape the hide to the desired thickness. The process of scraping continued over the course of several days. During this time, the parchment maker continually tightened the tension on the stretching plane while the skin dried. The result was parchment, a smooth and durable material that could last over 1,000 years. Before parchment could be written on, it had to be specially prepared. First, the parchment was rubbed with pumice powder to roughen the surface, and then dusted with a sticky powder. These steps made the surface receptive to inks and colors. The whole finished skin was then cut down to the size of pages needed for a particular book. A big manuscript was assembled from sheets almost as large as a single skin. For smaller books, the skin was cut into 2 or more pieces. The parchment sheets were folded and nested to make gatherings, usually of 16 or 20 pages. The vibrant illuminations in a medieval manuscript often overshadow the words on the page, yet the writing of the script was as important as the painting of the images. The tools of a scribe, the person who copied the text onto the page, were simple. Pens, called quills, were made from the feathers of a bird, which were soaked in water, dried, and hardened with heated sand. The scribe carved the quill to a rough point, cut a slit to draw ink down, then trimmed the point to the proper width. The shape of the quill point varied with the style of the lettering being copied. Scribes made ink from a variety of materials. Gallnuts, growths found on oak trees, were often used to create a dark black ink. Black ink was also made by dissolving a common carbon substance. The resulting ink was called lampblack. Before the scribe began writing, he ruled the parchment using a straight edge. Many of the scribes and their patrons prized a regular and elegant script. If a scribe made an error, he would scratch it out with a penknife. Because the page was made from parchment, which was very resilient, it could stand many erasures of this type. An illuminator decorated the pages of a manuscript using paint and precious metals. He began only after a scribe had finished copying the text. The illuminator first sketched his design, then added details, such as the features of a figure or the interlacing of a decorated initial. Thin sheets of precious metals, like gold leaf, were always applied first. The illuminator put down a base coat consisting of either a plaster-like substance called gesso or a gum, as shown here. Once the gum base dried, the moisture in the illuminator's breath was enough to make the small piece of gold leaf stick to the page. Then the illuminator brushed away the excess and polished the gold leaf. After applying the gold leaf, the illuminator painted his design. Each color was made from a vegetable dye or a mineral substance ground up and dissolved in the wood. The illuminator applied the paler shades first, then the darker tones. Once the illuminator applied black outlines and delicate white highlights to the figures and lines, the illumination was finished. After the scribes and illuminators had finished writing and decorating the parchment pages, the manuscript was bound. Groups of folded sheets of parchment, called gatherings, were sewn together with strong linen thread onto flexible supports, such as these narrow leather thongs. Next, the binder attached end bands, which secured the top and bottom ends of the pages in the spine of the book. The binder then laced the leather thongs along the spine through channels and tunnels, which had been carved into wood boards. These boards were the covers of the manuscript. The thongs could be held in place by wood pegs or iron nails. The volume was then covered, usually with leather. Without pressure from the covers to keep the leaves flat, parchment expanded and contracted with changes in temperature and humidity. pressure was applied by the addition of clasps or straps, which held the book closed. The binding of the manuscript could be decorated with any one of a variety of materials. A manuscript might be covered with leather, stamped or tooled with gold, or covered with silks or velvets. The most elaborate bindings received sculpted decoration made from precious metals. The materials of the binding depended on the wealth of the patron, the type of manuscript, and its intended use.
So as we see from that video, the process of making a manuscript took a long time, and it required great wealth. And it is living. If you think of the galls from the oak tree, right, a living thing. It helps make the ink, and we think of the leather. We think of the skin that's involved in it. And the document is alive. And they've held their wealth over these 1,000 to 700 years. And here we have an example of a 14th century French illuminated manuscript, which has to do with the Grail story. It recently sold at Sotheby's for around $3.5 million. They keep their value. As you may have noticed in the video, the completed text of a manuscript is surrounded by white space or open space. And we identify this space, as we do in modern books, as the margins of a text. The margins of a medieval manuscript are, like the manuscripts themselves, living. Now this one is maybe not as interesting, but in this manuscript itself there's a lot of commentary on the side of it. And so what we find in these manuscripts, they have spaces for commentary, emendations, returns, which are when we miss a line, we have to find a way to get it back in, drolleries, which has to do with a very dry sense of humor, and grotesques. You can imagine what that is. Those things that exist in the space of manuscript margins have a name, and we call those Marginalia. For ages, readers have been enamored with the spaces around a page's text. We're drawn to them. They call out to us to populate them with the thoughts and images dancing in our minds. Herman Melville once wrote that, quote, "the best reading was on the fly leaves," unquote, those blank pages at the beginning or end of a work. And in 1890, the American painter William Morris Hunt poignantly observed that there is scarcely a child whose first impulse is not to scribble on the wall or any fresh piece of paper, unquote. So what is it with us in blank spaces? Hunt is right, though. We gravitate toward the edges of a page from a very young age. He says, again, the child scribbling on the margin of his school books is really worth more to him than all he gets out of them. To him, the margin is the best part of all books, and he finds in it the soothing influence of a clear sky in a landscape. I love that image of a clear sky in the landscape of the text. And while I certainly wouldn't agree with Hunt's dim view of what we might actually get out of a book's text, I do find myself agreeing with the sentiment that a book's margins are spaces in which creativity might flourish. But not all those inhabitants of manuscript margins are flourishes of creativity. Some of them are mostly utilitarian. I want to cover a few of those now. I'm thinking here of marginalia like textual emendations, returns, glosses, and commentaries. If you can imagine the amount of time that went into a single recto, and that would be like the right-hand page of an open book. I think for the St. John's Bible, it took scribes around 12 hours of labor just to write the text in. So for a single page, 12 hours to write that. Maybe that's like your paper in English comp. I don't know. I hope it doesn't take you 12 hours. But you could understand that sort of laborious work, how easy it would be for errors to creep into the text, especially when they're tired. So you might also marvel at the fact that given the tedious nature of such work, there aren't more errors in medieval manuscripts, and they aren't. They're very well done and almost always have very few errors in them. From the 10th century onward, it was common for scribes who made an error, for instance, when a line was missed. As I said before, it's called an eye skip. How do you get that line back in? Right? You've written an entire page, and you get to the end of it, and someone reads over it, and you're missing an entire line. What do you do? well, you maybe find a different job as a monk somewhere else, but you have to get that back in there. So the text and margin, oftentimes one way to do this was to use something that's called a sign of return. And this sign of return, which we can see here, if you notice here, this is the sign of return. And on the margin, we have the sign here. So we know to match them up. And here's another one. And we could look somewhere in the text and we would find that, and that's where this needs to go. For the manuscript page that bears the marks of a less than competent scribe, these returns were particularly helpful because they allowed for several different symbols to be used, helping the reader avoid confusion. So, right, we had in manuscript culture, you had to create a way to deal with human error, and you could be more creative or less creative about that. And one of my favorite sort of notations in manuscript margins is called the manicula, or little hand. This is common from the later 13th century onward for scribes to enter these in when they wanted to point to something they thought was significant. It's not necessarily an error, but something significant. Who knows what's going on over there? Ah, you know, it's like coming out of the mouth. And this hybrid creature, I don't know what that is, like a dragon chicken with a hand head. I don't know. Or two really important here. But right, it could be boring writing this text that way. And so how do we make this thing come alive? There's, of course, a great deal of good to be found in the studies of these utilitarian marginalia, but that's for someone else to explore. That's as far as we're going today with those. I promised a little bit of fun in the title of the talk, and I won't let you down. Hopefully I don't get fired. I won't, I promise. There are some really horrible manuscript marginalia that I did not include because I like to work here. One of the oldest and most enduring characteristics of certain medieval illuminated manuscripts are the drolleries, also known as grotesques. And these creatures live in the margins. These are common in manuscripts from the 13th to the 15th century. Look at that sad cat playing the lyre. Look at him. He's just like, wow. He's so sad. They're often hybrid creatures, ridiculous situations. Many of them are humorous. Some of them are ribald, and they do not appear here for that reason. They should certainly not be shared with company. The modern reader of manuscripts, though, is often left to wonder, what the heck is going on with these creatures who live in the margins in oftentimes such close juxtaposition to deeply religious texts? What are they doing there? Well, we have it looks like he's eating a donut. I just got back from Hinckley's. We've got a lion. You know, like, why do all my cats sound the same? And then, the cat playing the bagpipe up there. Like, doesn't it make sense? Cats are so precocious. They would play a bagpipe. Another common creature is called the Gorillaz. And the Gorillaz is this sort of wild man who lacks a torso and has no neck, is often nude. But here we have a nun and a monk next to each other, the Gorillaz. And they often, like, what's going on here, these naked head torso creatures? Well, they represented the wild man and were exemplary of the rude and physical passions of humans. And they're also really funny. I promised monkeys flatulating, and it's worse than that. What is going on with the monkeys? First of all, we've got the thinker up here. We've got the thinker. This is a kind of humor that appeals to junior high boys, I think. So this drollery is the anthropomorphized monkey. So we see these monkeys, and they're doing all sorts of human-type things. I guess human-type, pooping on a platter. I don't know how human-type that is. And if you notice what he's carrying like a cook's wooden spoon. So we won't go any further with what's happening there. And we have this, it looks like the Wizard of Oz monkey, smashing that guy in the head with an axe. What's happening? Well, let me just say that every time I see these sorts of marginalia creatures, I feel like I've stumbled upon some class bully's notebook. Who did these things, okay? And remember the absurdity of that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when Arthur and his knights are led by Tim the Enchanter to the lair of the killer rabbit of Carbonog. Remember this? Even though Tim warns them that the rabbit has a vicious streak a mile long, they don't believe him, right? Big pointy teeth, right? Yeah. They foolishly approach. Well, the members of Monty Python had done their research. Terry Gilliam knew what he was doing. Because murdered-minded rabbits were all the rave in medieval Marginalia. So what's going on with this, right? There's our little killer rabbit of Carbonog. But here we've got two rabbits like, yeah, come on, see here, see? They're like mobster rabbits. They've got this guy all tied up. He's going to beat him with a mace. This guy's already, c'est la vie, he's gone. And what the heck? He's like, shh, as the dog is hanging from the tree. If that were a cat, I'd be like, fine. But, and this guy's out of luck. He's an initial there, letter, and it's just so sad that he doesn't have arms. He can't defend himself. And this is one of my favorite images here. This knight's like, whoa, and then the rabbit is like, bring it. He's gonna fight. But this is common. We actually see this in a virtue and vice cycle that are in cathedrals in Western Europe. And you see there will be a virtue. We'll talk about this in a little bit here. A virtue and a vice next to each other, often one above and one below. And the run away, and they're all running away from the rabbit, and ha ha, isn't that silly? Well, this is a part of medieval iconography, because here you have carved into stone from the 13th century a knight, and jumping out right here from a bush is a rabbit. And he's going, ah, and he's dropping his sword. And this is the vice of cowardice, which we would have associated with the virtue of courage. So why do these rabbits proliferate in the margins? That's a joke. Well, because rabbits were everywhere, for one, and also because they were rich with meaning. The presence of a rabbit in the margin of a manuscript could indicate innocence, cowardice, even passive but willing sexuality. Think of the breeding habits of rabbits, right? They looked at the rabbits, and there was meaning there from the proliferation of rabbits all around them. And as much as we find it funny today, medieval artists likewise found humor in the prospect of rabbits inverting hierarchy, getting their revenge, and taking over the world. But with some marginalia, we feel a bit like we've walked into a room just as someone delivers the punchline of a fantastic joke. We really have no idea why the joke was funny, but we feel obligated to laugh. Ha ha ha, right? Like, what's going on with knights and snails? The knight and snail motif is one of these jokes we know we should laugh at, but we're not sure why. This odd resonance is commonly found in the margins of manuscripts, but its meaning remains ambiguous to scholars. An art historian, Michael Camille, noted in his groundbreaking work, Image on the Edge, the Margins of Medieval Art, that just as a proverb has no single divine authority, but is spoken in response to specific situations, marginal imagery likewise lacks the iconographic stability of a religious narrative or icon. The knight and snail motif is ready to be placed into a variety of contexts where it will work in different ways and mean different things. The medieval artist's ability was not measured in terms of invention as today, but in the capacity to combine traditional motifs in new and challenging ways. We want it to mean one thing. Knight and snail equals this. But medieval iconography is much richer than that. It refuses that sort of narrowing of meaning, that sort of binary thinking. So that causes a problem for us, right? If there are many different ways to read medieval marginalia, is meaning elusive? Well, it may be elusive, but it's certainly there, even if it is at times a bit juvenile, even if that meaning really only made sense for a particular reader in a particular place. But our modern sensibilities at times betray us. We want, as I said, to read things in a medieval marginalia that fit our own research agendas. An example of that is Meyer Shapiro writing under the influence of psychoanalytic theory. So you can imagine where that could go. He was writing in the 30s. He saw marginal images as the liberation of unconscious impulses repressed by religion while more recently, one scholar has described them as like the doodles in students' notebooks today, the signs of daydreams. So there's an attempt, in other words, to say, well, this means something even the artist didn't know it meant. They didn't know what was going on for them. And this sort of subconscious, Freudian subconscious, it's coming out, right, in the side. Or, it was just them goofing around. Well, as Camille argues, we ought not think in such simplistic terms. Categorizing marginalia as either simply free associations or the embodiment of repression does not treat this subject well. Because medieval manuscripts were local and particular, that is, they were typically created for a particular patron or community who existed in a specific locale at a particular time in history, we often have to work hard to reconstruct the meaning of their marginalia. But folks, that's one of the great joys of manuscript scholarship. We get to be investigators. For instance, scholars have learned that the motif of the knight and snail, though odd to us, could have signified several things to the manuscript's original community. It could have signified an erotic encounter. And by the way, the medievals had a very different understanding of sexuality than we do today. So one of the things we may often make a mistake doing in modern culture is trying to read modern sexuality into medieval sexuality. It doesn't quite work that way. It could have been the vice of cowardice, which was seen as a sin against God. Or it could call to mind a common proverbial expression, to flee a snail. And yeah, so snails, if you ever come across a snail, they're a little terrifying. So step on them, right? Take that, snail. Well, my own scholarship has, since my days as a graduate student, been wrapped up in a lot of things, but especially in manuscript studies. And one of my earliest seminar papers was concerned with an error in the illumination of a 13th century manuscript called the Bible of Saint Louis. This Bible was among several popular picture Bible manuscripts of the 13th and 15th centuries. Because remember, not many people are literate. Most people will not have access to these Bibles. They'll have to go to the church to see them. And they need images to help them understand. These Bibles, some of them were called Bible moralisées. It's my best French. This means moralized Bibles. They're moralized Bibles. Not like they yell at you all the time. They're like, you shouldn't do that. Don't do this. No, they spoke to you through their images. They're expensive, they're illuminated, and heavily illustrated. We actually have a single page of this, of the facsimile up in the English department, so you can go up there and linger and look at it much more closely. And Western Michigan University has a copy, a facsimile of the Bible of Saint Louis in their rare books group. In fact, a page of this manuscript would have been mostly pictures. And there are, you can see the Bible, the biblical text here on the sides. As I said, pictures were an important method of instruction in a mostly illiterate society and offered a way of teaching morality. These moralized Bibles depicted pairs of scenes, often connecting the Old and New Testaments in roundels or medallions, and you see those here. So you get a biblical text, and I can't remember if we go left to right or if we go up and down here, but hoc signe, it says there in Latin. I know you can read that, right? I could make it up. It says, you'd believe me, hoc signe, which means this signifies. So what you get is you get a passage of Scripture, and you have an image that goes along with that. And then what you get below it is the signification, the allegorical reading of it, the moralized reading of it. And what we call this is we call this typology. They're typological. And these Bibles don't include all of Scripture, only passages that lend themselves to moral readings. In Christian theology, typology is the practice of biblical exegesis concerned with the relationship of the Old and New Testament. In typology, Old Testament persons, events, prophecies, etc., are seen as types. And this comes from Greek typos, which is a stamp, blow, or hitting. It's what you do with coins. You imprint an image on them, right? Like am I getting too close? I keep cutting out here. And these were seen as prefiguring the work of Christ in the New Testament. So what to do, as I recently said in class, with it's Elisha, right, calling in the bears to eat the children who called him Old Baldy. Like, what do you do with that? Loving God. For example, a typological reading of the story of Jonah appreciates not only its literal but also its typological nature, such that we understand his return from the belly of the whale not only to be a literal and historical account, but also a prefiguration of Christ's resurrection. Now remember, these Bibles were quite expensive, so they weren't for the average medieval peasant. They were, in fact, commissioned and intended for the instruction of French royalty, typical. In fact, I was only able to look at this and research it because it was created in facsimile form, where I did my master's degree. So I want to talk a little bit about the work that I did on this. What I found in one of these roundels, which was, this is the moralization. The 4 rivers, this is in Genesis, the 4 rivers that come out of the garden, they understood those 4 rivers to represent the 4 cardinal virtues. So in the center of this little roundel, we have Lady Ecclesia, the church. And then we have the cardinal virtues, which you can see prudentia is right there, temperance, fortitudine, and justitia. So we have prudence, or wisdom, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And I was looking closely at this because I was struggling as a grad student to find something to write about for my final paper. I know you never experience that as students, right? And I was looking and I thought, okay, what are they? They're each holding an icon. They're each holding a symbol that represents something connected to that virtue. And so what we get here is we have Justice holding her sword, and these are all women. Justice personifications. Justice holding a sword. We have Fortitude with a lion. There are those cats again. And then we have Temperance with a camel. I love that, right? You know, camels hold water, so it's temperance. Even keel, you know, whatever camels look like. But what's odd here is prudence or wisdom. Prudence is holding, and you can see it here. Look at that magnifying glass. Isn't that awesome? My PowerPoint skills here. It looks like a little alien creature, but it's a little baby bird in flames. So, right? Oh, it's so sad. Well, it's the phoenix. It's the phoenix. But that was strange to me. I started researching what's going on with this. What's going on with this phoenix in here? There's a problem with it because the phoenix is not associated with prudence or wisdom. What is associated with prudence and wisdom is a viper or a serpent. You think of Christ's words, be as prudent as a viper or a serpent. And so I started doing a little digging, and I learned that this manuscript was made in a manuscript shop, in a scriptorium, that was right near Notre Dame de Paris. Just down the street, right? They'd go get their sandwich over at Blimpie's, and then they'd head over, and they'd check out the work that was being done on the cathedral. And the west facade right here, it's other than being just fantastically beautiful, right down at the bottom here we have the virtue and vice cycles that I mentioned already. And as I started to dig a little deeper, I found that here's an image of the virtue and vice cycle. Here is prudence. And prudence has the staff with the serpent on it. And next to it is chastity with the phoenix. And so what I argued was that, and I think it is still right, is that the illustrators who oftentimes didn't know what they were illustrating or what the images meant, they were common laborers in some ways, were familiar with this west facade and were familiar with the virtue and vice cycle, and you know what? They done messed up. They saw chastity, assumed it was prudence, and in this manuscript placed in the wrong image. They messed up. Well, so why am I sharing this with you? Because I'm awesome? No. In fact, this image is always bittersweet to me, my work with the Bible of Saint Louis, because, and my wife is here, she could attest to this, this work represents both my introduction to manuscript culture and is also an abiding source of embarrassment for me personally. It was also a formative moment for me as a student, but you want to hear about the embarrassing part of it. The seminar paper I wrote was horrible. I mean, really, really, really bad. And I got a really bad grade on it as a grad student and began to question my existence as a grad student. I still have the paper today, and I looked over it as I was preparing this talk, and I thought of maybe putting a page up there, but my pride got the better of me. And choppy writing. See, students, when I say this to you, I'm not being mean, I promise. It's to help you work through so you're not in grad school like I was and having to learn this. Because I was writing this paper for a professor who was a former curator at the J. Paul Getty Museum. She was an art historian, and I still think she was very kind even in the grade she gave me. She wrote some pretty halting and harsh comments in the margins. And let me tell you, these marginalia were not humorous. Grotesque perhaps, but not humorous. One of them, probably fairly, read, "Just because you made a trip to the library doesn't mean you need a full page and 3 footnotes in your paper." To be fair, she told me to go look the source up in the library to verify my claim, and so I did it. I just didn't know how to navigate the suggestion beyond that. And so I thought I had to make a big deal about the one source I found in the library. She maybe lacked a little bit of tact, but whatever, you know. That graduate seminar paper, like a medieval manuscript, is a document unto itself, one that requires certain knowledge of its form and content. You've got to know what you're dealing with. And I didn't know that. And so I learned from my error and was given a chance to correct the shabby seminar paper. Thankfully, Dr. Tiviadale was willing to let me rework it. Now, with that said, I don't think my revised essay was much better. But I'm certain that the process of failing and correcting my work was instrumental to my ability to become a better writer, and I think person. I still remember Kelly and I were driving down Gull Road in Kalamazoo after I got the paper, just in near tears because I thought, what am I doing in grad school? Like, what am I doing? Why am I being criticized for something like this? What is the purpose of life? Let's get ice cream. So we pulled over, and I remember we were sitting and getting ice cream, and she encouraged me, as she has many times throughout the process of error and correction. And because I had a professor who was willing to hold me accountable to high standards and to direct me toward improvement, I didn't give up on manuscripts. In fact, my first publication appeared in a Cambridge University journal and was a transcription and translation of a Latin charm against thieves in a miscellany, in a manuscript of a lot of things that were put together and then bound that may or may not have anything to do with each other. And this appears in a manuscript that has the earliest recorded Robin Hood poem in it. And this is what I worked with. This is the charm, contra furias et ladronibus, so against thieves and robbers. So, right, Robin Hood, maybe there's a connection there. But someone decided along the way, they're like, just scratch it out. Like, there are lines all through it. And then what to do with this lion and this rooster at the bottom. And I had to work with this marginal image and figure this out. So this year, the SAU community has had the opportunity to host a work that calls us to reflect on ancient practices of manuscript culture, the Heritage Edition of the Gospels and Acts of the St. John's Bible. And you heard about the St. John's Bible this morning. It was a collaborative work of Benedictine monks at St. John's Abbey and University in Collegeville, Minnesota, as well as Welsh calligrapher and artist Donald Jackson. 15 years to come to completion. They originally thought it was only going to be 4 or 5 years. But they became, through their work, the first monastic community in 500 years to commission a handwritten Bible. Why? Because they're expensive, they're impractical, they're difficult to replicate. The Bible's illuminated and was created using traditional methods, as we saw the same methods used in the video we watched. And they wanted to engage contemporary questions and concerns. They wanted it to be a Bible for this time and this place, but also one that would last beyond this time and place. It's a culmination of a community of artists, scholars, and theologians, and is a modern example of how we might create beautiful things by returning to practices that, by modern standards, are impractical. Of course, I've been like a kid in a candy shop with the Bible here, and I've had the joy of seeing the original unbound manuscript pages of the entire Bible, which are housed in this special hermetically sealed room at St. John's University. You get in by having sand in a bag and then taking the gold idol off and placing it on and then quickly, right? That's how you get in the room. We lost a few people, but, it's just Dr. Bill Rowe. But honestly, I felt like a poor man's Indiana Jones in that place. It was a wonderful experience to see the work that went into it. And the pages are yet unbound. So what we have is a facsimile edition, and they're bound, but they will eventually bind the Bible into 7 different volumes, because if it were one volume, it would weigh like 300 pounds. And there are stories of monks being killed by Bibles in Scriptoria where they fell off a top shelf. And you're always like, what was that monk up to? Like, the word of God, like, smote him down. Like, I knew it. He was up to no good. I told you. But unlike the, at times, confusing nature of imagery in medieval manuscripts, the St. John's Bible is contemporary, and thus we struggle a little less to understand the images that populate its margins. Because of its contemporary nature, it is also able to teach us about the local and particular nature of the St. John's Bible and its community of artists. They're not nameless scribes and illustrators, forgotten to those who come after. In fact, several companion books have been published elucidating the richness and depth of meaning in the art of the Bible. So we sort of have an advantage that those crafting medieval manuscripts did not have, and those receiving them did not have. And yes, the Bible contains errors. Several $million project, and there are errors in it. Among the 7 volumes of the Bible, there are quite a few, not quite a few, there are 7 or 8 errors that have crept into the pages. But rather than removing these errors, and this is what I love, rather than removing the errors, those working on the Bible chose to leave them there as a sign of the living nature of the St. John's Bible. The errors are a testament to the human touch that helped bring it to fruition. They offer an opportunity to embrace human limits, to acknowledge our finitude, and to speak to our deep need for redemption. You maybe saw this morning. Here we have the image. This is a return. We saw the little signs, the signs of return earlier. They were even more creative about this. You forget a line, now what? Well, let's get a bumblebee that we'd find in Minnesota. And let's have him be like some Da Vincian bumblebee who's put together this wheeled contraption. And right, you can see the motion and where the leverage is going to be working here. And he's pulling this line back up. These little miniatures are done in acrylic by Chris Tomlin, and they're beautiful. Beautiful. You need to look at the St. John's Bible that we have on campus in the library. Leaf through it carefully with permission. Don't rip the pages, please. Just the Heritage Edition alone, each volume is like $20,000. I'm saying that because I don't want you to steal it. We have serious security in the library, so look out. But what to do? An opportunity to make an error a thing of beauty. This is from Out of the Whirlwind. This is in Job. And the story behind this error is that they were showing the St. John's Bible, and they had this page open. And they may have had a poster made from this. And I think it was a second or third grader, a child, was staring at it and said, you know, you have a mistake here. And they're like, no, we don't. The Bible's finished. No, we don't. No, we don't. And they said, yeah, look. A cross doesn't have 2 C's. How many times have you written a cross with 2 C's? Why doesn't it have 2 C's? Let's just redo the dictionary here. It needs 2 C's. But this went through so many eyes of people carefully looking over it, experts, professionals, and they still missed it. They still missed it. And they had a chance. They probably could have gone through in the original, and they could have, right, as we saw, they could have done an erasure by scraping away some of the ink and part of the skin, the vellum. But they didn't. They said, no, leave it there. Leave it there as a sign of our limits, as a sign of our fallibility, as a sign of our humanness, as a sign of our dependency upon one who is infallible. And another fun return here is a lemur monkey. See, monkey, there's a good monkey. It's a good monkey. He's helping out. And this is because in the text there's a reference to a monkey or a baboon. And so they said, let's have, since this is in the text, let's have this lemur monkey, this baboon-like creature, bring the line back up. And there are vines, and he's hanging on, he's pulling it back up. I love it. It's beautiful. It's small. It lives in the margins. We humans are fairly predictable. When we stumble, we look around to make sure no one saw us. Like the time I wiped out on my bike on campus and the ice and my bag and stuff went flying as students were walking to chapel. And I jumped up like nothing happened. When we sing out of key, we hope everyone around us is loud enough to drown us out. When we make mistakes, we're tempted to cover them up, to hide them. And we know that the life that lacks margins is one that has no room to learn. So today I hope that I've encouraged you to imagine how something as small as the margins of medieval manuscripts can be strange places where we might gather and find knowledge not of motion, but of stillness, not of speech, but of silence, and not of words alone, but of the Word. So may your lives be like the pages of medieval manuscripts, with enough margin to be filled with humor, only occasionally marked by error, and inspired by the hope of correction. Thank you.